Good morning, and thank you for being with us. This is Khalil Hashem with the Michigan.com. Thank you for being with us. Today is Friday, and it is a beautiful day. It's Friday, June 16th, and it's a cool day. After a lot of rain, we needed the rain. The temperature is expected to reach the 70s. Enjoy the day. On behalf of US Arab Radio, we wish you the best of time and peace and happiness during this beautiful weekend, holiday weekend. Juneteenth is on Monday, so please enjoy it. Summer is starting, and part of summer is one of those little nasty, whizzing things that go around and annoy us and sometimes leave us puffy and itchy. Worse than that, sometimes they leave us sick. And then the state recently put out an advisory asking people to be careful because of all the diseases that they carry. And with us this morning is Dr. Natasha Bagdasarian. She's the state's chief medical executive. Good morning, and thank you for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on today.
Absolutely. So these nasty little things can harm us. What is the threat here, and what can we do to really protect ourselves?
Really great questions. So the advisory we put out talked about a virus in specific called Jamestown Canyon virus, which is just one of the viruses that mosquitoes can carry. And so this advisory is not just really about that particular virus. It's just a reminder that mosquito season is here. Winter seemed to drag on forever here in Michigan. And then all of a sudden, we were in this dry spell that really delayed some of the mosquito breeding season. And now that we started to get some rain, those mosquitoes are breeding. And whenever they breed and bite people, they can, of course, transmit diseases. And the diseases that we worry about in the Michigan area in particular are things like West Nile virus and EEE, Eastern Equine Encephalitis virus. And then, of course, the one that I mentioned earlier, the Jamestown Canyon virus, which is less common than those other two.
Yeah. Just to remind listeners that mosquitoes lay eggs on the ground and then they don't hatch unless it rains. Once it rains, they hatch and then they come after us with force. Also, only female mosquitoes go for blood for egg reproduction, and through the process they can carry diseases. You mentioned the three diseases. Could you tell us a little bit more about what's the severity of these diseases?
Well, with all three of these diseases, there is a broad range of symptoms. And in the majority of the time, people may not have symptoms at all. They may be completely asymptomatic and may not even know that they were exposed to an infected mosquito. But people can also develop symptoms like fever, headache, chills, and in the most severe cases, they can develop conditions that are known as meningitis or encephalitis, and that is an inflammation of the brain or the spinal cord, or the tissues around the spinal cord. And those can lead a person to actually have more severe illness and end up in the hospital in some cases.
Now, which one is the worst one?
The meningoencephalitis, that severity is the worst severity. But do you mean which virus is the worst virus?
Yes.
So again, with all of these viruses, they can go from asymptomatic to those severe cases of meningoencephalitis. And all three of them can actually have that severe presentation.
Yeah. And it's kind of a little early for mosquitoes right now. I mean, is this unusual to find these infected mosquitoes?
If anything, I think the mosquito breeding season got pushed a little bit later because of that really long dry spell we had when it wasn't raining. So I think things got pushed a little bit later, but then we, of course, expect mosquitoes to continue breeding and feeding on people throughout the warm summer months. So we really want people to take this advice about avoiding exposure to mosquitoes now and then through the entire summer when these critters are out and biting us. And the type of advice that we're giving people is use insect repellents, so things containing DEET or other approved formulations by the EPA, to wear long sleeve, long pants when they're out in nature. You can even do things like use fans to blow them away from you if you're sitting outside and trying to enjoy a meal. They're not very strong flyers. So just do whatever you can to avoid those exposures.
Absolutely. The best way is to avoid them totally, and either be under a mosquito net or be inside. At what are the worst time for mosquitoes? Is it like I believe it's evening and morning, or
Yeah, so dawn and dusk is when a lot of people get those mosquito bites. And, in these long summer days, we really find people wanting to enjoy those cooler times outdoors. And that's really when you can get bitten. So use those precautions to protect yourselves. And then the other thing is you don't want mosquitoes to breed in your area, in your neighborhood, or around your house. So if you make sure there's no standing water, that's another way to prevent mosquitoes from breeding
yes.
in your surroundings.
Yeah, absolutely. And they, which they do live, and I don't know the classifications and the names. I'm not an expert on mosquitoes. I did a story on it a long time ago, but they do breed in stagnant water, not equipment, whatever it is that holds water. This is where the bats are good. I wish the state builds more bat houses to bats can eat up to 1,000 to 3,000 mosquitoes a night. So it would be good to have some bats around. Now, if we get bit, and I mean, there's a lot of different bites we take. Which one does it really look different? The one that has the virus, or we don't know? We just start developing symptoms. And how long does it take to develop symptoms after being bitten?
So you really can't tell, which mosquito is carrying one of these diseases. You really can't often tell, if you've been outside, you may have multiple bites. You may have had bites over many days. So it's really hard to pin down which bite caused the exposure, and the bite wouldn't look any different. And in fact, there are many of us who don't really have that reaction to mosquito bites. So you may not even get a really raised, itchy, round bump. And that is really dependent on us. Some of us develop those raised itchy bumps more easily, and some of us don't. So people may not even know that they have been bitten. So it's just really good to try to avoid them as much as you can. And by the way, I'm very impressed with all your mosquito facts.
Oh, thank you, thank you. So, why do we get this red bump? Some of us.
It has to do with your immune system. And so some of us are more irritated, and our immune system reacts more strongly to the mosquito saliva. And some of us don't. And so if you have a friend or a family member who seems to get bitten less, you might feel jealous, like you're not getting bitten at all, and I'm covered in mosquito bites. And actually, the truth of the matter is, it's possible they're getting bitten less, but it's also possible they're just not developing those itchy round bumps, and they're getting bitten without knowing it.
Yeah. Are there any vaccines for the three diseases you mentioned in regard to mosquito bites?
We don't have human vaccines for those diseases yet. But of course, there's always vaccine development and scientific trials going on. So maybe that will change in coming years.
Okay, so for now, the best thing to do is, protect ourselves, avoid, these times if we can, and then use repellent if possible. Because the higher the DEET, I think there's more effective. As long as it doesn't, we don't have a reaction to it.
Higher DEET can last longer as well, and some mosquito repellents last longer. And of course, you can always do multiple things. You can use multiple strategies. You can apply DEET and then put on, a jacket with long sleeves or wear long pants, and put your fan on outside. So you can do multiple things to try to keep them away.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, some of us, and I don't know what's true or not. And then you mentioned, you spoke to that one as well. So some people maybe are bitten and they don't know. And I noticed that you see them flying toward more people than others because of the carbon monoxide and other factors. While I have you on the show, what kind of flu season? This is totally, I'm going to shift to a totally different topic, but since I have you on the show, what kind of flu season are we expecting? I heard some news about in Australia, the flu is pretty bad, and that sometimes serves as a warning to us, what kind of flu season we're going to have.
Very much. So that's one of the things we do in public health is we track what's happening in the southern hemisphere because we get clues about our coming cold and flu season. And yes, we have been noting that there's been a more severe flu season in the southern hemisphere. And so it could be predictive of what we're going to see here in the northern hemisphere. But every year, scientists reformulate the flu vaccine to cover those strains that we saw circulating in places like Australia. And so when the flu vaccine comes out in the fall, it should cover those circulating strains. And that's why it's really helpful for us to track what's happening in different parts of the world. So it will be very important in the fall to get your updated flu shot because it will cover those new strains that we've seen circulating. And
Absolutely.
while I'm talking about vaccines, can I mention one other thing?
Yes. I was going to ask you about COVID.
Oh, I'll talk about COVID too.
Okay, go
Um,
ahead.
and then maybe one more thing as well.
Sure.
But things are really good with COVID right now.
Yeah.
COVID cases are very low. Of course, we're not picking up all COVID cases because people test at home, but the number of COVID patients in the hospital, in the ICU, on ventilators, and people dying from COVID, those are all very low. So things are good with COVID right now. For folks who have been a little bit hesitant and saying, is this a good time to start taking off my mask in public places? This seems like a safe time to start removing your mask, unless, of course, you have concerns about your own personal immunity and you want to continue masking. Of course, everyone can make those choices for themselves, but this is a relatively safe time, one of the safest times we've seen since the beginning of the pandemic when it comes to COVID. But COVID is going to become more seasonal, and we're going to start seeing it in the same way we see influenza really becoming a problem in winter months. And so I think this is going to develop over time, but we're also looking towards a vaccine approach that will be similar to influenza, where there'll be a new COVID booster in the fall. We'll ask people to get their COVID booster, and hopefully it will cover for the strains and the variants that are circulating that winter. So I want everyone to know that this is a good time for COVID, but we will likely see surges of COVID in future years and future seasons, and we just have to be aware. And we from public health will communicate that out when we're expecting a bad COVID season.
So we should expect an updated booster when that, like September, October?
So we are hearing, and this has not been formally announced, but we're hearing that COVID vaccines will become an annual shot like flu vaccines. But again, this is tentative information that I'm sharing a little bit preliminarily, but it is likely that we'll start seeing annual COVID boosters.
Absolutely. Now the best time to take the flu shot.
So it really depends on what we're seeing. A lot of times in most normal years, so before COVID, I would tell my patients the best time to get the flu shot is in October, because then you'll have immunity that lasts through those worst months, which are usually in February, January, February, and maybe March. But because of COVID, things have been a little bit different these past few years. And we'll have to wait to see what this coming flu season looks like. Will it come a little bit earlier because people are not taking precautions, people are not getting vaccinated? Will it come later because maybe people are using some of those precautions? So it's yet to see what the flu season will look like. But in old flu seasons, I would say October is a good month to get your flu shot.
Absolutely. Now, monitoring what's going on in Australia, it should tell us what kind of mutation for the flu we're going to be dealing with. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we look at circulating strains of influenza and then modify the influenza vaccine accordingly. Places like Australia, South Africa, places in the southern hemisphere that are experiencing their winter months now.
Wonderful. Is there anything I haven't asked you that people need to know?
Yes, I would love to just spend a minute talking about routine childhood immunizations.
Sure.
One of the things we saw during the COVID pandemic is everything became very political and people lost some of their trust in public health and health. messaging. And we saw that childhood vaccinations have decreased over these last 3 years. And the rates of these routine childhood vaccinations that you and I had, when we were younger, those rates are going down. And there are fewer parents, for example, getting their kids vaccinated against things like measles, mumps, rubella. And we are now approaching rates where we will start to see outbreaks. We will start to see outbreaks in communities and schools and daycares if we don't do something about those routine childhood immunizations. These are very safe vaccines. They've been around for decades. Many of us had them when we were children. And I really want to encourage your viewers to talk to their friends and family about getting their kids up to date with vaccination, because COVID is in a good place right now. But I would hate for us to suffer the consequences of something like a measles outbreak that could be entirely preventable.
Absolutely. And, the easiest thing to do, just reminding listeners, is, I called the state, and I also called my doctor, and I said, what are we missing for our children? And they said 1, 2, 3. So we got them taken care of. Absolutely. I really appreciate your mentioning this. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. As always, your information is incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a
Absolutely.
wonderful day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye now.